Yes, we strongly urge Governor Jerry Brown to veto AB X215, the assisted suicide bill. This bill for a long time, by the way, was known as SB 128, so if any of your speakers call it that, you'll know what they mean. It all boils down to veto the assisted suicide bill. Let's hear it. Veto the assisted suicide bill.
And I'm a longtime disability advocate. I started doing disability advocacy when I was in college. Went on to have a career which ended as the Department of Rehabilitation Director. I also was a Dean of Student Services in the community colleges. So why have I devoted so much of my time in retirement to oppose assisted suicide legislation? Because along with my brothers and sisters and all the disability rights organizations nationally, we know what dangers this legislation presents to people with disabilities, to elders, for people from minority communities, to the poor, and others who are at great risk, in part in a profit-driven healthcare system, and in heavy part because of the stereotypes and discrimination against people with disabilities. So I'd like to share with you just a couple key points as to why I oppose this and our fellows in our disability rights organizations oppose it. First of all, the legislation makes no clear line between disability and terminal illness. When we address our fears, some of the sponsors and the supporters say, oh, well, this does not apply to people with disabilities. It says so in the bill. Those are empty words because there is no black line between a disability condition and a terminal illness. ALS, SMA, multiple sclerosis, even cancer may all be terminal illnesses, but they're also disabilities. And many people with disabilities, some of whom you'll hear from today, have been told they were not going to live till 5 years old, till 10 years old, and now they're in their 50s or 60s. Also, many people with a new diagnosis are naturally depressed and want to take their life. But with adjustment and support and counseling and the right attitude from society and the community of inclusion, they go on to live full and rich and fulfilling lives. So that is an empty promise in the legislation. Second of all, the bill promotes marginalization of people with disabilities. If you look at what happens in Oregon, that many of the people who want assisted suicide are not in intractable pain, but they fear, they are not even unable to, but they fear not being able to perform certain activities of daily living, like getting in and out of bed or using the bathroom independently. And this has become equated for them with dignity. Well, we people with disabilities say it does not matter what activities of daily living you cannot do. It does not matter what IQ score you have. It does not matter if you have dementia. All human beings have dignity, and this legislation marginalizes people with disabilities and sadly makes California a state which seeks exclusion rather than inclusion. We are very disappointed in some of our legislative leaders in this because historically they support inclusion. Inclusion for people who have a different sexual orientation, from ethnic minorities, and even for people with disabilities in other situations. However, in this case, we're saying that they are not looking deeply enough to the risks that this bill poses around what is dignity and how the inability to perform certain activities does not mean one should seek to end their life. And last of all, we are very afraid of this because current events and history. Now, we know that these legislators, and certainly not this governor, did not intend for this to lead to a slippery slope.
And I was diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy when I was a very young child, and I have been told I was going to die many, many times throughout my life. But thankfully, I consider life to be a blessing in any form. I believe that all lives matter. I believe we shouldn't interfere with God's plan. We will all die when it is our time, but not necessarily our choice. And I do believe that murder is not health care. And that is why I am urging Governor Brown to please stand up for the rights of our most vulnerable populations and veto ABX 215.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Stand with us as we stand with the disability community and say no. Say to Governor Brown, veto AB 2X15. Say it with me, veto AB 2X15. Thank you.
I just want to share a few thoughts with you. My name is Kevin Holden. I'm a minister and labor organizer in Oakland. I represent 30,000 low-income service workers in the Bay Area. I'm here in the opposition to AB 2X2-15. I personally have struggled for years to get access to health care. I've advocated for members of my family who have also been denied access to health care. 20 years ago, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and a short time later, I was diagnosed with osteoarthritis. For the last decade, I've struggled to get adequate treatment and attention from doctors, both within the Medi-Cal system and privately. I've never been able to secure any real treatment for my health issues. I've never been able to secure any real health treatment for my arthritis and Crohn's disease, besides being prescribed massive amounts of opiate painkillers. There are days when I wonder, should I get out of bed? Should I go through the agony of putting my pants on or trying to tie my shoes? Why should I hobble in pain down to the bus stop to see another doctor who won't have time to listen to me or will write me another prescription for painkillers? From this position, it becomes very clear that assisted suicide, if legalized as a medical treatment, would be attractive to someone like me, who after years of struggle has never had access to a wide range of options available to those with the means to purchase them. People like me, at some point, have to weigh the continued privatization and neglect against an easier, less painful way out. I know that my experience within the healthcare system is not unique or exceptional. In fact, they are all too common. 1 in 3 Californians are eligible for Medi-Cal, yet are forced to go to the emergency room as their only source of medical services, because so many doctors can't afford to accept Medi-Cal's below-cost reimbursement rates. ABX 2-15, if passed as a law in the most populous state in the nation, would be used as a tool by the giant healthcare and insurance industries to cut costs, raise their bottom line. This would occur at a direct expense of patients who require costly long-term care. Do not establish a public policy that would permit HMOs and hospital management corporations to offer suicide as a so-called medical treatment. Do not allow the government to have a role in coercing the poor, elderly, and disabled to choose suicide, aiding and abetting the giants in the medical industry to reap millions of profits or cost savings. Rather than being granted, I suppose, right to die, I demand that all low-income workers have access to comprehensive health care regardless of their ability to pay. Yes. I demand that the governor introduce legislation that would guarantee access to food, shelter, clothing, and all the resources necessary to maintain our health before the daily struggles in obtaining these things forced to us into a position of contemplating suicide.
1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Denial of care is killing the poor.
Denial of care is killing the poor.
5, 6, 7, 8.
5, 6, 7, 8.
Stop them now before it's too late.
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 I take pains to describe these details because I'm aware that I stand in line for the healthcare cost chopping board that could, with one policy decision, cut me off from the life-giving supports I need as a person with disability. Yet, I work full-time as a disability rights advocate, and I manage an independent living center in downtown Los Angeles. With my work in the disability community, I see this frightening trend. Last week, for example, a former co-worker called me very distressed because the doctors wanted his grandmother brought to hospice care and to just be given sleeping medication and less food. They said her Alzheimer's disease is far too gone, affecting her ability to manage some basic bodily functions. Up to that point, the family was caring for their grandmom. She could still ride with them in the car for outings and sit with them watching TV. When they noticed that their grandmom was getting slower and slower, they brought her to the doctor, hoping to get her some medication to improve her condition. They were shocked at the doctor's suggestion of hospice care. Rejecting the prospect of leaving the grandmom to the hospice system, the family decided to continue caring for the grandmom as they have been doing. Just 2 years ago, a school teacher brought me the case of a student with disability. Actually, she had only a speech impediment. She was distraught because she was in a fight with her brother for the life of their mother, who was battling with cancer. The brother wanted their mother euthanized, but his sister was opposing it because she felt closer to their mom, who had expressed to her to live even just a little bit more. The hospital ethics committee forbade us from helping the daughter fight for the mother, and our representative was booted out of the ethics review committee meeting about the mother. They only entertained the brother. Clearly, the institutional bias was with the more able-bodied sibling, believed to be more competent to decide on the mother's fate. In an atmosphere like this, not even the tightest written safeguards purportedly included in the AB X 215 assisted suicide bill would protect people with disabilities. What is most frightening of all is that the bill, now resurfacing in California, I think 3 or 4 times, creates the most precipitous, slippery slope toward the silent extermination of our people, the most vulnerable of them being people with terminal illnesses, people with temporary depression, most of whom are at the mercy of their HMOs with no financial resources and very little physical energy to fight for their lives. As a person with a disability who has survived polio and cancer, I have watched in alarm at how quickly the atmosphere has changed over the years in the attitudes of the medical community about our treatment. The presumption of life has been eroded and replaced with a disturbing presumption of a so-called choice, often interpreted to be the withdrawal of even the most routinary, life-sustaining food and water. 5 years ago, I was asked by my doctor if I would like a tracheotomy done on me if suddenly I came down with pneumonia and could not breathe. The episode alarmed me. Why was it even a question for him? Why do I first have to declare it on paper that I want to live if my doctor has sworn to the Hippocratic Oath? What has happened to medicine? So, as we chanted, Governor Brown, listen up! Veto this bill! Kill this bill and not the people! Thank you.
He was a person with a disability, mental illness. He had a 43-year history of depression, including many suicide attempts. Despite this fact, he was able to get a prescription for assisted suicide. His doctor never sent him for a psychiatric evaluation, which is one of the so-called safeguards in Oregon law. Not only that, during the time when he had the lethal prescription, he was involuntarily committed to a mental institution. He suffered delusions and was determined to be incompetent. The court made sure that the guns were removed from his home, but they didn't think it was important enough to confiscate his assisted suicide medication. So what's up with that? They knew about his lethal medication. This is a case of blatant discrimination against a person with a disability. Mr. Freeland's life was devalued. The possibility of his suicide deemed unimportant. But as fate would have it, one day, Mr. Freeland dialed the wrong number. He was trying to reach Compassion and Choices, but instead he reached Physicians for Compassionate Care. He found a doctor who helped him find treatment. With the help of volunteers, his suffering was relieved. He lived for almost 2 years after he received his lethal prescription. That's right, 2 years. He died a natural death, reconciled with his daughter, and was supported by friends. So despite that kind of happy ending, there's a couple of lessons here. First, the safeguards are a joke. They are rooted in fantasy. Proponents who are themselves economically privileged, able-bodied, and mostly white are clueless when it comes to the real-life constraints of poverty and disability. They think the law protects us. They are unaware of the deep prejudices and disparities that remain in our institutions. Every day, people with disabilities fall through the cracks. With assisted suicide, falling through the cracks will be lethal. Second, the state of mental health treatment in this country is appalling. Facing death, yes, can be depressing. People need help. Yet this simple end-of-life option, skillful mental health treatment, is effectively denied to millions simply because of economics. Instead, we get a solution proposed of assisted suicide. Mental health treatment should not be dependent upon chance encounters with volunteers, as in the case of Mr. Freeland. We can do better than that. The desire for assisted suicide is a symptom. It tells us that there is suffering. Assisted suicide is not a solution. The solution is aggressive symptom management. The solution is greater investment in palliative care. The solution is mental health treatment for everybody. The solution is access to life-saving options, regardless of disability, of poverty, of immigration, or insurance status. We all deserve end-of-life options that reduce suffering. The correct response to suffering is care, not assisted suicide.
Assisted suicide is not the solution to California's Medi-Cal funding shortfall, and it is not the solution to the systematic and social discrimination that people with disabilities, Latinos, African Americans, confront every day. But let's start with the bill. This bill makes it perfectly legal for people with years or even decades to live to throw away their lives, or for their lives to be thrown away by others. Let's consider terminal illness. How does this bill define terminal illness? Well, if we look in the bill, terminal illness is understood to be a disease, medically confirmed, incurable, irreversible, and prognosticated to result in death within 6 months. What about, is that with care or without care?
Good question.
The bill doesn't tell us. Yeah? What about if the patient refuses treatment? Or if somebody on behalf of the patient refuses treatment? Repeat after me. The bill doesn't tell us. That's right. And what if your HMO? What if your HMO refuses to pay for your treatment? That's right. The bill doesn't tell us. We all know, though, and even the supporters know, what this is really about. Only a small fraction of people in the Oregon statistics actually used assisted suicide because of pain. The majority of them use it because of disability prejudice, because of a fear of losing so-called dignity and autonomy. Ableism. It's ableist, and it violates our civil rights. And yet, we in the disability community know that people with disabilities can live good lives. We know that people with disabilities can have jobs, we can have families, and we can be successful. And yet, it's not all that way. The opposition, or our opposition, but the supporters talk about choice. They say, we want more choices. People with disabilities love choice. Don't you love choice? I would like to choose to have a good, productive, lucrative career. I think all of us, we'd like to choose not only to have a career, but to retire and not have to worry about poverty, not be forced into poverty, and to have a pension that we earned. I think we would like to choose to have families and to have children. I think we'd like to choose not to be patronized and discriminated against every day. But you know what? We don't have those choices right now. We don't have those choices. And finally, this bill is not the solution to that. The center of disability prejudice is the fear of dependency. They say that people with disabilities aren't independent. But what is independence anyway? I got a question for y'all, including the folks without disabilities. Did you raise the chicken that laid that egg? And did you raise the hog that made that bacon that you ate this morning? Did you grow the wheat that was used to make your Cheerios and milk the cow that made your milk? No. Nobody is independent. Everybody depends on someone for something. And in fact, we are all interdependent. Interdependence and community are the foundations of a society that knows that assisted suicide is not the final solution to healthcare funding shortfalls, to discrimination, and the lack of access to services. A society that believes in community and interdependence knows that there's nothing wrong with getting old. There's nothing wrong with having a disability. There's nothing wrong with needing help. Our lives are dignified. And that's why we're here today, to ask Governor Brown for his veto of this reckless and irresponsible bill.